We're going live. Welcome everyone as you are rolling in. We're going to get started right at 12:30. I'm doing some technical stuff right now, which causes every one of our YouTube lives to look like the thumbnail is me like trying to figure out what I'm doing. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Hitting Seth with the host capabilities. You now have the power. And we are the puppets. Okay. Almost 12:30. Welcome everyone. As you roll in, we'd love for you to add your name, where you're from, link us to your newsletter if you have one. We are going to be using the chat for chat today. You can chat to panelists, you can chat to attendees, you can chat with everyone. And then we have the Q&A, which we are trying to reserve for questions so that they don't get lost in the chat. So you've got along the bottom of your Zoom window, a one thought bubble equals chat. The Q&A has two thought bubbles. So this session and some others we have run, we have found very entertaining if we ask questions throughout. So if you have a question that is relevant to something that Liz is talking about, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that. And if possible, we'd love to have you come on and ask the question, or I might just interrupt and ask the question for you, depending on how we're doing time-wise. So that's our Zoom housekeeping that we have going on. Welcome everyone who is joining in right now. We'd love for you to drop your name, where you're from, your newsletter in the chat. Additionally, Seth is going to drop in some links to panelists and attendees. The Newsletter Fest has I lost my mouse. We have a Slack community that we opened up just for this event that we hope will live on beyond the event, because we've got some cool channels in there like newsletter resources, newsletter jobs, places where you can drop a link to your fresh content. That is the Newsletter Fest Slack community he just dropped a link to. We also have two contests going on this week. One is to win a free year of Curated. And that involves launching an account for free and then building out a newsletter and submitting it for people to vote by Thursday night. We'll be announcing the winner on Friday. We also have Newsletter of the Year awards being announced on Friday. You can go and vote for your favorite newsletters. They are newsletters that we crowdsourced nominees for. So there are some real winners in there, and I'm excited to see who comes out on top for that. And that's about it in terms of housekeeping. I would love to hand it over to Liz Willits now, who will be presenting and explaining why copy is everything. Thank you for joining us, Liz.
Thank you, Ashley. And thank you everyone who is here today joining. Really excited to have you. Today we're going to be talking about copy is everything, how to write a newsletter that engages subscribers from start to finish. A little bit about myself before we jump in. I run my own marketing consultancy and my own marketing business, and I've worked with mostly tech companies on their email marketing, their content strategy, and their copywriting. And I'm also an instructor at University of Vermont, where I talk about digital marketing and email marketing. And I am obsessed with email. I have worked in email and for SaaS companies or software as a service companies who were email platforms. So I've sent millions of emails throughout my career. And I love this stuff. I'm kind of nerdy about it. So I'm really excited to be at a conference with other people who love newsletters. So really excited to be here. Let's jump in. So this is an advertisement from John Caples, who was a direct advertisement or direct copywriting legend. And this is one of his most famous headlines. As you can probably tell, it's from many years ago. We wouldn't run an ad like this nowadays, but it was an extremely successful ad because—
Hey, Liz, are you screen sharing right now?
Now I'm screen sharing. Hold on one second. Thank you for interrupting me.
Yeah, no problem. Okay.
How are we now?
You're good to go. Yep.
Cool.
I'm seeing it.
Awesome. So like I was saying, this is one of John Caples' most famous headlines he ever wrote. Super successful. And one of the reasons that it works so well is that it uses copywriting principles. And it is still to this day a very famous headline. So what exactly is copywriting? Copywriting is creating persuasive content that convinces people to take an action. And you may think, well, why would I apply copywriting to an email newsletter? Why would I do that? Well, copywriting uses persuasion to convince an audience to take an action. Often that action is buying, but why stop there? Copywriting gets people to take an action, and with it, you can convince your audience to open your emails, click on your calls to action, and become loyal readers. So these very same principles that copywriters use to drive millions in sales can be used to create a loyal audience who opens and clicks your email newsletter. And on top of that, the most successful newsletters out there use copywriting principles. And after you watch this presentation, I hope you're going to be able to identify the copywriting principles those newsletters use. And when you see them, say, aha, they have a copywriter on their team or someone who understands copywriting. So with all of that, let's jump in and talk about some email copywriting best practices and principles before I show you a ton of examples of copywriting in action inside email newsletters. So first question I get when I talk about email copywriting principles or email newsletter writing principles is, should I use short emails or should I use long emails? Which one is better? And you probably have heard people say, well, our audience has the attention span of a goldfish, so my email should be really short. And that's not actually true. It's not that long emails convert, and it's not that short emails convert. It's that good copy converts. So the length of your email doesn't matter as long as you are creating a persuasive argument to get people to take an action. So instead of worrying about email length, think about the argument you're making in your content. There's something called the 7-word email, which is literally 7 words, and it can be very persuasive. And then there are emails which might be thousands of words, and those also can be very persuasive. So keep that in mind when you hear people say, you can only write short emails because no one's going to pay attention to a long email. That's not actually true. And whether your email is short or long, the key is it needs to be readable. A lot of the reason that people don't or may not read long emails is A, because they're not well written, or B, they're not readable. So here's how you can make your emails readable. Use short sentences and paragraphs. You don't want compound sentences. You don't want sentences that span multiple lines. Anytime you have a listing or a group of things, use bolded lists. It's much easier for the eye to see and to read through. Bold key phrases. And again, that's great for skimmers because you're going to have 2 types of readers, 2 types of subscribers, the subscribers who skim and the subscribers who read every word. And this is situational. They might be skimmers one day and they might be deep divers the next day. So you need to make your copy skimmable, but also make your newsletter copy have enough information that the deep divers know what you're talking about. Add headlines for your skimmers, and then edit for readability. Do you get caught on a sentence as you're reading it? Does it take you a little bit longer to read a certain sentence? Well, then you're going to want to rewrite it and then also have others read for readability. And then ultimately write for your audience, keep them in mind. So let's look at an example of readable copy. So this is part of a newsletter. It's part of Morning Brew's newsletter, actually. And a few things I wanted to point out here. One, they use really short paragraphs. Almost universally, all of their paragraphs are 4 lines or less. And that's a good rule to follow. They also use really short sentences most often. So you can see this first sentence here is really short, and they use a lot of short sentences throughout. They bold text. Again, that's for skimmers, so they can quickly tell what's going on at a glance. And they use headlines so that, again, skimmers can go through your newsletter and find the topics that are of interest to them. And then bolded lists, they use here and they use here as well, and they use them throughout their newsletter. And there's 2 reasons you want to do this. One, for your skimmers, and it makes it, or actually 3 reasons. For your skimmers, it makes it really easy for them to skim. 2, it is just easier to read emails that are formatted like this. And 3, over 50% of your audience is going to be opening your email from a mobile device, most likely. And on a mobile device is a tiny screen. Long chunks of text are really difficult to read on a tiny screen. So it's really important to format your emails and format them well. And that can make a huge difference in your performance. And copywriters are very good at formatting content so that it's extremely readable. And if you're wondering or struggling to figure out how to simplify your copy, you can use a tool like the Hemingway Editor or Grammarly. Hemingway Editor is the one I use. It's free. And the Hemingway Editor will actually give you a reading grade level for your copy. The lower the grade level is typically better because you want your reading to be very simple so that everyone can read it. And it'll also let you know if you're using passive voice, when you should be using active voice, and if your sentences are very complex. So you can use this to give you some basic guidelines on how to make your copy more readable. Now, what about voice and tone? You probably have heard people talk about voice and tone quite a bit. Well, number one, have one. So make sure you document what your voice and tone is. And if you're unsure what those two are, voice is consistent. And if you think about it as the way we speak, I speak in a certain voice. And if I all of a sudden had a very deep voice or a very high pitched voice, all of a sudden in the middle of this presentation, that would be kind of weird if my voice changed. And it's the same with your email newsletter. You want to have a voice, it should be consistent. And then you can have a tone. So tone is most easily considered as voice inflection. So for instance, if you're angry, you might raise your voice, or if you're telling a joke, you might remove inflection from your voice. So tone is situational. It depends on what's happening. Voice is consistent, and they add a lot of life and flavor to your newsletter. If you don't have a voice and tone, you might come off as rather boring, or you might confuse your audience because one week in your newsletter, you show up a certain way, and then the next week, you seem like an entirely different person or a different brand, and that is confusing to an audience. So let's look at two examples. This is from Finimize. They are, I believe, a daily newsletter on financial information. This is the top of their newsletter. They say, in case you missed it, Bitcoin, and this is the kind of cutting edge analysis you've come to expect from us, is expensive. And if you're aware of what's going on with Bitcoin right now, it's extraordinarily expensive. So they're kind of making fun of themselves. And they have this very light, humorous tone, a very, what I would call a young tone throughout every single one of their newsletters. They begin the next sentence, lucky for you, there's no need to invest in the cryptocurrency to actually invest in the cryptocurrency. So you have this very fun, light, jovial tone, which is cool because they're talking about financial investing, which can typically be a very boring and stodgy kind of topic. And they're adding a lot of fun to it and making it more accessible for people, which is their mission, by using very normal, down-to-earth language and by using humor. Here is another section of a newsletter with a very different tone. This is Below the Fold. And they have a much more formal tone. They begin their newsletter. It seems dinosaurs may not have traveled, may have not only traveled from Wisconsin to Wyoming millions of years ago, but transported over rocks while at it years ago. And then they go on, they have a much more formal, kind of like a journalist sort of tone where they're relating the news in a very straightforward manner. Again, if the following week they sent an email with the Finimize's tone, the Finimize newsletter tone, it'd be very confusing to their audience. And when you have a team of writers, which you might eventually, or you might have now if you have a big newsletter, when you have a team of writers, voice and tone are very important because you don't want a different writer to bring an entirely different voice to your newsletter. You want a consistent voice and then a tone that changes based on the situation. And another big point I want to drive home is creativity. If you're a marketer, as I am, you probably copy people. And, we all learn from each other, and that's great. Great to learn from each other, great to look at examples of newsletters and see what's working, what's not. But what I see a lot in the marketing world, and if you're not a marketer, maybe you don't have to worry about this, is people copying each other almost exactly the same. And the problem with this is nothing stands out. If you are one of the hundreds of newsletters that looks and writes and seems exactly the same as all of the other newsletters and does nothing creative, you're not very interesting. So you can get ideas from other people, but try to create something that is unique and that serves your market in a really unique way, or your subscribers or your audience in a really unique way. Things that are all the same are not interesting. It's a recipe for boring copy. And another really important copywriting principle I want to touch on is hooks. Hooks grab your reader's attention via typically a psychological feeling that they have, and that might be desire, it might be surprise, curiosity, identification, doubt, urgency, specificity, fear, exclusivity, etc. So basically, hooks grab attention, and typically they grab attention by using psychology or what you know about your own audience. And before you think, oh, well, this sounds manipulative, actually, creating hooks that gear to your audience's psychology is a better way to help them, shows you understand them, and it's a better way to get them to read your copy. So one of the ways that you can really use hooks very well is subject lines. So in the next section here, I'm going to talk about how you can use hooks in your subject lines and how you can write better subject lines using copywriting principles so that you're going to get higher open rates. And when it comes to open rates, what you want to aim for is an open rate of 20% or higher. Now, 20% is the industry or the worldwide average pretty much for newsletter open rates. That'll vary depending on what statistical or data report you're reading, but it's about 20%. And my wish for you is that you aim for something far above 20% because you don't want to be average. I would go for an open rate over 30% if you can for a newsletter. And what you'll see with a newsletter too is that over time, as you've had subscribers for a while, your open rates are going to slowly decrease. And that's a good time to clean your email list because you probably have people on your list who stopped opening. So let's jump into these different hooks you can use. But first, a few rules about subject lines. Number one, this is a huge pet peeve of mine. Don't trick your subscribers into opening an email. If you're going to use a hook, make sure your content delivers, because there's no better way to lose your audience's trust than to hook them to get them to open your email. And then your content inside your email has nothing to do with the hook. You want to build a brand around your newsletter, and a part of that brand should be trust, where your audience knows when they get an email from you, they can trust you enough that you're not going to try to trick them. When you try to trick your subscribers and they catch on to the fact that you tricked them with clickbait to open an email, they're going to be more likely to unsubscribe. And they're also going to be less likely to open future emails, because when they see a hook from you, when they see a subject line from you that's catchy, that grabs their attention, they're going to think, well, this is probably just a trick to get me to open it. So don't trick your subscribers. In your subject lines, you can be descriptive, or you can drive curiosity. Typically, curiosity-driven subject lines aren't as descriptive, but you can actually use both a descriptive subject line that also drives curiosity. More on that in a bit. And try long subject lines, try short subject lines. Again, this goes back to, people ask me all the time, what's the perfect length for a subject line? Test. There is no perfect length for a subject line. One of the things that works with subject lines is doing things that are different from what everyone else is doing. And the trends around subject lines are cyclical. So one moment, everyone's writing a 60-character subject line, and then the next moment, they're all writing a 10-character subject line. So you want to be different. You want to try different things, A/B test. I tend to prefer short subject lines right now because of mobile accessibility. On a mobile device, subject lines cut off in between 30 and 40 characters. So if you can be under 30 characters, you're going to be visible on mobile without being cut off. And again, you can use the hooks I mentioned to easily write subject lines. And those hooks get people to pay attention or grab their attention via curiosity, desire, surprise, identification, doubt, specificity, urgency, exclusivity, fear, scarcity. There's a lot of feelings you can use to get people to hook your readers with your subject line. So let's look at some examples. This is Ramit Sethi. He's one of my favorite copywriters, email copywriters. He's just a brilliant copywriter, really smart. He sells online courses and helps people with wealth management and career. So this one subject line he sent was, what separates winners from everyone else? And there's a few hooks that this uses. One, desire. For the subscriber who wants to be a winner, you read this and you're like, oh, I want to be a winner. And then that goes into curiosity. Well, I wonder what does separate them. And then into doubt or questioning. Well, am I a winner? Do I have these traits myself? So that would be an example of a great hook. Here's another from Copy Hackers, which is a copywriting resource. So if you want more information on copywriting, check out Copy Hackers. And their subject line was, just for copy schoolers, private event tomorrow. This is using exclusivity. It's also using urgency to drive action. And you've probably seen a lot of subject lines like this that drive action through urgency and exclusivity. Here's one from Finimize. And Finimize, they always put an emoji at the beginning of their subject line, and they always use really short subject lines. So that's another thing to consider for your subject lines. You might want to brand them. So you might want to have a brand for your subject lines where you always have a consistent pattern you use. And so people know how you show up in the inbox. And that's a way to have a voice or to show your brand. And their subject line was your inflation fears. If you are keeping an eye on the economy right now, you might know that inflation is a real fear right now. And that is the hook. It is fear. Inflation. It's the thing that's on people's minds that they're wondering, is this going to happen? And so it's a great way to hook your reader and then provide helpful content that's going to help them learn more about that fear and whether it's really happening. Here's another from Ramit Sethi. The subject line is people who started a business very recently. So identification, that's me. So if it's someone reading it who did just start a business, this is speaking to them. They could be very likely to open it because it's speaking to who they are. It's desire too, for people who want to start a business, and as well as curiosity, because you're kind of like, what is he talking about? It seems like it's an unfinished phrase. People who started a business very recently, well, what's next? And when you write a subject line that kind of makes people feel like, well, what's the point? Like, what's the end of this sentence? That's a great way to drive curiosity and to get people to open your emails. Now, I showed a few subject line examples, but let's not forget about preview text. Preview text is the unbolded content that appears to the right of your subject line. And most people forget about preview text entirely, or they might not know what it's called. It can also be called pre-header text, but it's the unbolded content that appears to the right of your subject line in the inbox. And it is an opportunity to stand out because, again, most people don't focus on it. Most people aren't using it. Common preview text mistakes, almost all of them pertain to not actually intentionally putting in preview text, but it might be just the word image because it's the alt text behind the first image in their email. And that's what shows up in the preview text, kind of embarrassing. It might be something like, to view this email as a web page, click this link. Again, you're not doing anything that's not useful. Your preview text should help get people to open the email. It might just be a random link. I see that quite often. And often, this is the most common thing that happens, is it's really just the first line of your email. And that happens because most email marketing providers or email marketing solutions, for your preview text, they simply just pull in the first line of your email if you don't set up preview text. And this can work if the first line of your email is really interesting, and if it plays well with your subject line, and if it looks good in the inbox. But that's a lot of ifs. It's much better to intentionally set your preview text. Again, this is a great opportunity to get people to open your email. So a few quick preview text tips. You can use another hook in your preview text. You can add details or additional info to your hook in your subject line. And you can also mention another topic in your email that might be of interest if your subject line isn't, if the topic of your subject line isn't. So for instance, if I was writing a newsletter on email marketing and my subject line is 6 email list growth tips, I could have preview text that mentions another topic because perhaps my subscribers that day aren't really interested in 6 email list growth tips. So I could also have as my preview text my guide to writing great email copy. And so that way, If people aren't interested in the topic of your subject line, your preview text is hooking them on this different topic, because even though email list growth is a topic that a lot of people might be interested in, you might have readers on your list who are like, I know that, or I just read an article on that. And so you can actually use your preview text to hook people on other areas of your newsletter. Now let's jump into the email content itself. So first off, if possible, personalize. So a lot of people don't personalize in their newsletters, and it's a big mistake. But what you want to do is, at the point of subscribing, or as soon as someone does subscribe, start gathering data about your subscribers. And then you can personalize your newsletters based on what you know. Here's an amazing example from a company called Curated. They actually sell personality tests, paid for personality tests. And in their welcome email, the first email they send subscribers, they ask them what personality type they are. And then what they do is tag the subscriber based on what they click. And if they say INFJ, they'll send them blog posts for INFJ personality types. And so it's a great way to personalize, and again, a great way to increase open and click-through rates. Another big tip when it comes to newsletters, and this is the most important tip if you're going to take anything away from this, and you've probably heard this during Newsletter Fest, is be so valuable they can't ignore you. That is one of the best copywriting newsletter tips there is. If your newsletter is super valuable to your target audience, they're not going to ignore you. No one sees the newsletter that is the most valuable newsletter they've ever read and says, I'm not going to open that this week. When something's really valuable, you open it. And so the big part of that is knowing your audience and knowing what's valuable to them, and then solving their problems and answering their questions. And I think a lot of us assume we know what our audience wants. So take some time and get to know your audience, survey them, talk to them, see what topics they want to learn about. And so on to solving subscriber pain points. This is one email from Plant-Based Juniors. They are a blog that teaches people how to raise their kids plant-based. And they're one of my clients as well. And one of the pain points we knew that audience had, and we found this out via audience research, was that a lot of plant-based parents get questioned on, why are you raising your child plant-based? And a lot of people, make them feel that, oh, you're irresponsible for raising your child on a plant-based diet. And so that's why we sent this email about the 3 myths of a plant-based diet to, again, solve that subscriber pain point and help them know how to answer these questions they were getting, and also to just provide helpful information. Another thing you can do to help you write copy in your newsletter are copywriting formulas. I rely on copywriting formulas a lot. And once you know a copywriting formula pretty well, you can just use it without thinking about it. And so copywriting formulas are proven, repeatable structures to write copy that converts. So it's like an equation, X plus Y equals Z. And that's basically what a copywriting formula is. It helps you write copy. You can use them in your newsletter. So my favorite copywriting formula of all time is PAS, which stands for problem, agitation, solution. So with the PAS formula, you first introduce a problem, and then you agitate that problem or explain why it's such a big deal. And then you present a solution to that problem. And the reason people love this and the mind loves this is because it's a story arc. If you look at any story, a story begins with a problem, which is then agitated, and the problem becomes a big deal, and then a solution comes, or a resolution. Here's an example of the PAS formula in the Skim, which is a really popular daily newsletter with millions of subscribers. So here they introduce the problem, and just hearing the words job interview can get sweat flowing. And then they agitate it, but it's the stage we're all hoping to reach after hours and hours and hours of searching and applying. So they agitate the problem and the work that goes into this. And so then they introduce a solution. So when you land one, just remember STAR. It stands for situation, task, action, result. And then they go into how this is a solution to that problem. So that's a really quick example of PAS. Here's another example of PAS, where this is again from Plant-Based Juniors. They introduce the problem: when we were pregnant, the first trimester was rough. Morning sickness got us. Frequent nausea is terrible, especially on top of everything else pregnant mamas go through. So that's problem, agitation. And then the solution. So we created a nutritious plant-based recipe to help. And then they link off to a blog post with this recipe. That's another example of PASS. Another copywriting formula I really love is called AIDA, AIDA, and that stands for attention, interest, desire, action. So you grab someone's attention, you get their interest, you build desire, and then you give them an action to take. So here is one from Copy Hackers and Joanna Wiebe. They first get your interest with, they get your attention with the subject line, get the email map we use. And then the interest is: last week, for the first time ever, we ran a launch campaign while we were out of office. The Copy Hackers crew was on our annual 2-week break from December 22nd to January 6th. And as a reader, you're probably like, well, wait a minute, how did you run a launch when you weren't there while you're out of office? That's interesting. And then they build desire by showing all the benefits that this gave them. They were doing other things while they ran this launch. They were on the Peloton, they were reading books, they baked, ate, drank, played Scrabble. So again, it's building that desire because you're like, I'd love to make money while I'm doing other things. And then they continue on with desire, which is why today I'm going to walk you through the elements we had to have in one place by December 22nd in order to set it and forget it. With a launch that brought in $25K monthly recurring revenue. And then the action: join us at this Zoom video session to learn how we did it. So those are two really brief intros to copywriting formulas. There are dozens and maybe hundreds of copywriting formulas out there. Google them. There are tons of articles and resources on copywriting formulas. If you thought, wow, this is great, I want to learn more. So feel free to check those out online. There's a lot of them. Now, call to actions. There are different types you can use: hyperlink text or buttons. What I suggest is using both, testing both, A/B testing with them to see how they work, and using them both in conjunction. A big thing, again, that I recommend with call to actions is don't copy everyone else. Be unique. Avoid the click here button. Super boring. I think we're all done with that. It's kind of out of date, so don't do it. And try to be unique with your calls to action. That's a great way to grab people's attention, is to do something unique. So this is the Skim newsletter, and two examples of calls to action from them. The one is this at the top of the newsletter. It's this listen now button, and that's for their podcast episode. And then they also have throughout the newsletter hyperlinked text, like here where they're talking about skincare oil. But notice what they do here. This is a kind of creative use of hyperlinked text. They're being fun and witty. Again, that's bringing out their voice and tone. But they say oil yourself. Again, kind of a humorous play on words there. And they actually hyperlink that text, which is interesting. It's different. A lot of people hyperlink the text. It's like, learn more here, or, read this article to learn more. And you can be really unique and stand out by hyperlinking text in interesting ways, and by using call to action button copy that's different and interesting.
This is bringing out a lot of questions. Like, suddenly we hit a moment where people are like, wait a second, slow down. Cool. Rachel has a question. I'm going to ask it quickly because it's not super complicated. For buttons, do you suggest image-based or HTML?
I suggest HTML because the problem with the image buttons is if someone has images turned off in their inbox settings, the button won't appear for them, or it'll appear really wonky for them. So I suggest HTML buttons.
Okay. And then an anonymous attendee is asking if you suggest taking a copywriting course, if it's not your strong suit, and if you have any recommendations.
Yes. Any marketer or anyone who writes, I suggest taking a copywriting course. And if you're creating a newsletter, you write. It's a great way to level up what you're doing and to really understand how to persuade your audience or how to convince them to take action and to read your copy. As far as who I recommend, I love Copy Hackers. They have a bunch of paid resources, and their paid courses are expensive, heads up, but they have hundreds, I think maybe even thousands of free videos you can check out and tons of free content. They do a weekly free Zoom video on copywriting. And so there's a lot of stuff you can check out there. They're my favorite resource. I like them. I also like Eddie Schlaner of, I think his company is called Very Good Copy. He's another great resource to follow as well.
Thank you. Okay. Back as you were.
Cool. And this is surprising, or it might surprise you, but surprisingly, the PS section of an email is one of the most read parts of an email. And so if you can add a PS to your newsletter, it might be really effective for you. And the reason that the PS is one of the most read parts of an email is because there are a lot of skimmers out there. Now, there are deep divers who read every word. They are the attention or the detail-oriented people. But then for the skimmers, they tend to skip around your email, read the first part, read some headlines, and then they go down to the PS. And so that's why your PS can be one of the most read parts of your email. And so you can do a lot of your PS. You can have calls to action in your PS. I've seen people have PPPPSs in their emails. Conversion copywriters do this all the time. Again, it's one of the ways that you can be different. A lot of people aren't doing that, and it's kind of unique and interesting. And anything that's unique, interesting, or different catches your audience's attention. So here's two examples of PSs. One is from Anne Hanley, who has a really phenomenal newsletter called Total Anarchy. And in her PS, which she has in, I think, every newsletter she sends, she says, PS, if you like this newsletter and want to support, buy a book. She's a best-selling author, or forward the newsletter to a friend with an invitation to subscribe right here. So she has two important calls to action in the bottom of her newsletter in this PS section. So that's a way to use a PS section. And this email on the right is from Ramit Sethi. And he just adds more context onto his newsletter with this PS here. He says, by the way, there's a deeper message, and passion isn't everything besides how to pick the right business idea. And he goes on to explain this concept. And you'll notice this is a really long PS. That's another thing a lot of conversion copywriters do. They have these very long PSs where they explain more information. And another thing I want to point out is his use of by the way. Again, when you do things that are different, a lot of people don't put BTW in their emails because it seems too informal. And if that's not your voice, you shouldn't be doing that. But if your voice is casual, then doing things like this can really grab attention, again, because they are not normal. Now, that's a wrap. But before we jump into Q&A or additional cute questions you might have, I do have a free guide I wanted to tell you guys about that you can get. It's 100% free, but I talk about how I get some really high open rates and really high click-through rates, and what I do to get really high open rates and the subject line hacks I use, and more on subject lines, basically. So if you heard the subject line section of this presentation, you're like, I want to learn more, you can get my free guide at bit.ly/Liz Willits 1. Again, that's bit.ly/Liz Willits 1. It's 100% free, and I won't spam you. So with that, I would love to jump into questions.
Excellent. Look, I just added that link to the chat so everyone can click it. And it's there living live for you. Thank you so much for including that. I know people are going to be excited. I'm going to ramble until someone asks a question, or I might ask one myself. When you were talking about send people something that they can't live without, right? We had an interesting conversation with Margot Aaron yesterday, and I loved it because it went into a boy band discussion, but she made a great point, and I'd love for you to probably wax poetic about this too, and maybe even give us some examples of situations where you've seen this happen. But her point is that when you are delivering the thing that someone wants, they cannot get enough of you. And so you need to figure out how to write for an audience that wants you in that way, and to kind of get over the whole, I don't want to pester these people, I don't want to send too often, or these things. Because she said that I think she mentioned NSYNC, but like to her as an NSYNC fan, every poster she bought, someone else would have seen them all looking the same, but to her, they were each unique and valuable to be on her wall in that way. So would you mind speaking to that, using copy to build relationship and almost like a lovability or an addictive nature from your reader?
Yeah, and I think that almost goes back to the brand and the voice and the tone conversation. But developing a really lovable brand comes back to voice and tone. And so if you can have a strong voice that people would notice, and then almost that if people took their hands and blocked the logo at the top of your newsletter and didn't know who sent this email, they'd know who sent it because of your tone or because of your voice. And that's a great way to be lovable, is to show up as a brand and to show up as human, and to create that fanship, because it's not just the content we share, but it's also how we share it, how we show up in the inbox, and the fact that we build a relationship through being human or having a voice is a really great way to create those fans and get those fans. Because if you're sharing valuable information in a really boring way, you'll still have people who show up for that. But it's not, people, are less likely to share something that isn't cool. Being totally real. And so you can be cool by having a strong voice. You can be cool by having, a good design as well. But having that brand that people can identify with.
Would you say that copy is more important than design in some aspects? Yay.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that or said that. We're going to try to lure some people to show their faces and ask questions. If not, if you don't want to, just tell us no. But I see Seth dropping in the chat, asking David. I've got David, Rachel, and McKenna with questions waiting in the Q&A. If you'd like to come on, let us know. And Seth he has to promote you to panelist, and then he has to demote you. We found this a funny experience the other day. David wants me to ask, so I'll get done asking that. Any good recommendations on how to end newsletters, emails well? I often feel like my endings feel unfinished or rushed.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of different ways that people do this. A lot of newsletters have a consistent element at the end of their newsletter that they always do. Kind of makes it easy to end the newsletter. So, for instance, I showed you Anne Hanley's PS where she talks about, buy my book or share this newsletter. That is a common way to end a newsletter, and it's a really effective way to end your newsletter and to grow your list. Is simply to say, hey, if you found this newsletter valuable, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it, and use your voice for that. That was a very personal voice that I just used. But if you have a different voice that you use in your newsletter, customize that message to your voice. But that's a great way to end a newsletter, is simply asking people like, hey, if you like this, would really appreciate it if you shared it, and giving them that call to action. Because sometimes, they need to hear that call to action. They may not think of it. And also you're huge fans. They want to support you. And they want an opportunity to give back. And that plays on the psychological theory of reciprocity, which is when someone does something for us, we want to do something for them in return. And so your audience, your big fans, probably want to share your newsletter and might just need that call to action. So that's a great way to end a newsletter. I've seen people do things like a consistent sign off. And again, this goes back to the voice of the brand, but they might, I forget who this was, but there are people who have consistent signatures that are kind of weird signatures, like signing off and then their name or whatever. And so that's another way to add, to end a newsletter. But I really like the call to action to share the newsletter and to have that in every email, because it's going to help you with your list growth. Referrals are going to be your best subscribers anyway. So I'd recommend that. And I hope that helps.
I think it does. It prompts a question for me. We have opt-in weekly, which at the end of it, like the last category, right, is the opt-in challenge, which is something that I challenge people to do each week. Like, hey, here's this great article about how to find your niche or how to grow your audience. So I push them towards that specific advice. Like, so that's the last section. And then the sign off is, do you like this newsletter? Will you share it? How do you feel about like double stacking, something like that? Do you just consider that the back page and then the signature?
Yeah, I would consider both of those like, yeah, part of your sign off or the way you're capping off your newsletter. And the Skim does that same thing. They have like a few sections that are always at the end of their newsletters. So you know to expect them there. They're consistent. And that actually made me think of another newsletter who does something really funny. They ask I think this is Morning Brew, but they ask a question or trivia question at the top of their newsletter. And then at the bottom of the newsletter, they have the answers to the trivia question. So that's like another fun way of, how they're bringing their voice and their brand to the newsletter and using it to sign off. And so that would be, I guess, like my ultimate recommendation on it is, make your sign off or the way you end your email newsletter, consider if you're consistent with your voice and your brand, and maybe you want to do something witty and interesting too, like what these other newsletters are doing.
Yeah, we looked at the click yesterday, and about halfway or 3/4 of the way, they open a loop with it's like a section called or, and it's this or that, and it's trivia, right? And the answer is at the bottom. I'm gonna ask some of these other questions I've noticed in the chat. It looks like maybe most people want me to. So just like be loud in the chat if you actually do want to come on and ask yours, because I'm having trouble keeping up. Rachel asked, do you suggest writing with mobile first in mind since 50% plus of readers are on a mobile device?
Yeah, I would typically recommend writing from a mobile first perspective because it's much easier to read on a desktop device or a larger device. So there are less limitations. So if you write mobile first, likelihood that your desktop audience is going to be just fine. So I always send myself a test of an email and look at it on a mobile device. And you might want to look at it in different inboxes, like Gmail. It'll probably render differently in like the Gmail app versus the Apple Mail app. That's one of the challenges of email is emails render differently depending on where you're opening them. And we all hate Outlook because the rendering is very poor, but in my opinion. But yes, I would write mobile first. And that is why the short subject line trend is so big now, because a lot of the bigger newsletter companies are going mobile first.
Yeah. And go through and check, like look at the mobile version. And if you have a paragraph that extends from above the top of the scroll to the bottom, consider breaking that into a few, like I as a journalist and a writer with a background, like in thinking about something being a 1-sentence paragraph, have been kind of terrified by that and had to overcome that. Like that was an emotional almost process to get through that. I know that Liz writes a lot for LinkedIn, and I tend to kind of copy a LinkedIn writing style in some newsletters because I noticed in LinkedIn, like it's really easy to read this on my phone, process it, engage, move on, right? And so I think you have to kind of overcome that fear. And so I would encourage everyone right now, if you're not following Liz on LinkedIn, join her mother. in following some of the amazing copy that she puts together that will be inspirational for you both in social copy as well as in newsletter copy. McKenna asks, how do you balance professionalism and a casual voice? I work in a student newsroom and I struggle relating to both young and old audiences through voice and tone.
That's a challenging question. And it's interesting because often it depends, like your editor. So I found in my experiences, you might get pulled in two directions, which is one, your audience might be wanting one thing and your editor might be wanting a different thing. And I think that's where you always have to push back to audience first. Who is this audience? What do they want? And are they insulted by or put off by a casual tone in reality, or are they not? And one thing you can do when you have an audience who you assume prefers different kinds of tone is to A/B test emails with a more formal tone and with a more informal tone and see if that impacts performance. It's a challenge if you do have two very different audience types, but you should have a consistent voice no matter what. And it's kind of like, your voice attracts your tribe, right? And so maybe as time goes on, your audience shifts because you have gone a certain direction if they're with your voice, and certain people don't like it. But my experience with casual voice is that unless you're dealing with something like a legal topic or something that's very sensitive for the audience, if something's a very sensitive topic, you don't want to use a casual, informal tone, most likely. But unless you are, covering those very sensitive topics, I found that most people like an informal tone. Now, that's not without exception. It does vary, but a lot less people have problems with informal tones in my experience. The people who have the problems with the informal tones are your maybe your CEO, maybe your leadership at your company, who might not know the audience that well. So long answer, complicated question. It can be very difficult because, again, in my experience, it's your leadership might want this formal tone, and that can be a generational difference. Maybe they have experience where a business is always using a formal tone, but we've shifted to more human, personal brands. And so I would try to make that argument to your leadership team through A/B testing, through research.
Laura is asking, well, first of all, people are like shouting in the chat, like, fact, that is true. Like, so yay, you're hitting a note with them. Laura is asking, do you have any suggestions for how to use copy to complement design and images within an email?
Yeah, so I would recommend captions as far as complementing your imagery. Captions can have, I think people have strayed away from captions, but they can be really helpful when they're used well. But as far as complementing your imagery, I guess I would say, and I don't know if this answers the question, but a lot of people who are pro design will tend to have these ginormous images in their emails and then very little copy. But I think you need a better balance of image to copy, because our copy is persuading people to take action. Images can help with that, and images can be very persuasive as well. But your email shouldn't be one big image, which actually leads me down another rabbit trail, which is you use HTML emails. Don't use one gigantic image in your newsletter, again, because of how that will render in people's inboxes. So I hope that answers the question, but I would just keep in mind that you need copy to persuade people. You might also need images.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination there. And I would say also, like, what you were mentioning earlier when you're talking about pre-header text, and sometimes it's saying image in there, especially if the image doesn't load or if that's the first title or something that the client is processing, that you want to make sure to name your images something interesting. Like, A, don't name them anything embarrassing.
Yep.
And be descriptive with your image titles so that people want to have them render if they haven't, right?
Yeah, which is interesting. It brings up like the whole alt text conversation. And I've seen people use alt text in really creative ways. Like their alt text might just be, if you're seeing this, turn on images, like turn on images in your inbox. And like people who use really witty alt text. But something to keep in mind with alt text is accessibility. So one of the problems of just being humorous and doing something like click here to see the image is that some people are using screen readers. And because maybe they have a visual impairment. And so that's why it's really important to actually have descriptive alt text. It's not just so that the image renders, it's so that you're being accessible to all different kinds of people.
So Brennan is asking, I don't think Brennan said he wanted to come on. My daily newsletter takes a week-long break each season. I tend to announce in the Friday issue that we'll be off and we'll return soon. Should I be announcing the break ahead of time to give people a heads up? If a reader doesn't see that one note, they may be confused during the week off.
That might be, well, first off, props to you for doing a daily email newsletter. Huge props. I know how much work that is, and very cool. I'm very pro daily email newsletter if you can pull it off. So props. But yeah, second off, that might actually be a great place to use the PS throughout the entire week. Have a PS. It's like, hey, just heads up, next week we're going to be, I'm going to be out for my week-long break, and use your PS in that way. But I would mention it a couple times again, because there's going to be a portion of your audience who doesn't see that one email where you announce it. And the next week they're going to be like, where is this newsletter? Again, if you're sending one of those newsletters that's so valuable people can't ignore it, they're going to be, upset. So I would mention it a few times throughout that newsletter, maybe not every day in the week leading up to it, but maybe at least a few times. And you could put it at the top of your email. You could put it in the PS. There's no right, wrong way to do that.
Excellent. Okay, so we have an anonymous question, and that is, this is a good one. I want your feedback on this. What do you suggest be included in a welcome email?
Good question. So again, for anyone who's unaware, a welcome email is the first email you send to subscribers. It's typically automated. It introduces them or welcomes them to your email list. And it's really important for newsletter creators because it sets the tone for your relationship with them. And it also can do a few other important things. So first thing I would do is thank them for subscribing in that email. If you promise a lead magnet or a freebie in exchange for subscribing, you might want to deliver it in your welcome email. And then I would explain to them, again, you might put this on your landing page, but I'd reiterate it, your sending frequency, what kind of emails you're going to be sending, and just setting those expectations, because a big thing that the welcome email can do is get people ready to receive your newsletter, prep them for opening it, get them hyped about what's about to land in their inbox. So again, explaining the kind of value you're going to give them and reiterating that, and get them hyped. And another big thing you could do in your newsletter is asking them to whitelist you. And whitelisting is when someone adds you to their address book. When they do that, your emails are much more likely to get delivered to the inbox. And another thing you can do that's similar to whitelisting is actually asking people to drag your email from the promotions tab, if it landed in the promotions tab, to the primary tab. And Gmail tells us that when a user drags an email from promotions to primary, that all future emails will be delivered to the primary tab. So you can put that in your welcome email, say, hey, if this landed in your promotions tab, please drag it over to your primary tab and it'll land in the future, so that you can make sure that you get this newsletter every morning. And that can be really effective as well. And you can also get people to whitelist you simply by getting them to reply to your newsletter, or getting them to reply to your welcome email. That will automatically add you to their address book, again, increasing deliverability. So you could have a PS in your welcome email that says something like, what are you hoping to get out of this newsletter? Like, what topics would you like me to cover? And that's going to do two things. It's going to give you content ideas, which as a content creator, like we all want content ideas. So that's great for that. And two, it kind of sneakily gets them to whitelist you. But it's through getting meaningful interaction, not through like a sneaky way, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you asked them what they're hoping to hear about. Do you have any other questions? I feel like when I talked with Dan Oshinsky, he had a welcome email sequence he was recommending at one point in time. And it kind of had a list of questions that typically you'd be frustrated filling out if it was a form that you just wanted to subscribe to this email, but that if you were interested in future work with this person or future relationship with this company, basically it was just a list of questions, long form in the email, that 1, 2, 3 or something, asking them to reply to that. Do you feel like more than one question is overwhelm, or is appropriate in certain cases or something?
It could be a bit overwhelming for a welcome email, especially when, a welcome email by its nature is doing a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's delivering a lead magnet, it's setting expectations, and, you're getting people to reply, a lot of questions might be overwhelming. So you might want to break that out into a welcome series where you have your traditional welcome email, and then email 2, which maybe is delivered one day later. You ask them those different questions. Maybe you can use something like Amped for email to actually embed a survey into your email. And have that inside the welcome email. You could do something like the example I showed off in my presentation, which is having a question in your email and then hyperlinking all the different answers and tagging people in your email platform based on what they click. And so that way it's a one-click survey, instead of, asking them to go to the work of replying maybe to multiple questions at once.
I've seen also, I think it's helpful if you are established, you can put a list of links, some of your most read links or something, or read issues, like things that you feel like represent you well and will help them have more of a taste of what they're going to be getting from you.
Yeah.
That could be a good idea. I'm looking for more questions. I'm not seeing them. We are right at time, extraordinarily. Seth has one.
Sean had a question in the chat where he asks, are we able to send more than one welcome email in Curated and set up a sequence?
The current way it is set up is that there is one in there. So you have to use it powerfully. We do have that on the roadmap as something that we might be adding in. So I kind of go back and forth. This is a good question for you, Liz. I go back and forth. If I'm signing up for a weekly newsletter and I've just opted into it, I'm not sure exactly how I feel about, okay, I know I'm going to get the welcome email and that's going to tell me, hey, this comes once a week. I'm not sure how I feel about over the next month getting other dripped emails in a welcome campaign. Yeah. I feel like there's pros and cons to both of those, but in some way, I feel like, well, I just signed up for a weekly email and now you're sending me more, is kind of like not meeting my expectations. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's something to be careful about. If you're setting really strong expectations of you're only going to hear from me once a week, and the first thing you do is email them every day, that's not a great experience. So there's 2 options I would recommend. One, setting expectations that you have something like a welcome week, where the first week you welcome them on board and, you send them different content that first week. And I would not send them your newsletter that week because you don't want to be sending 2 emails in a day. So that's one option, to do something like a welcome week and to set expectations like that. The other thing I would recommend is dynamic content in your email newsletter. If that option is available to you. So meaning that for your new subscribers, you actually have slightly different content in their newsletter than you do for your for subscribers that have been around for more than a month or whatever. So you can have like a little special intro section for your new subscribers using something like dynamic content. And dynamic content is simply that it's content customized on it's the same. You send the same email out to everyone with dynamic sections that can be customized based on whatever parameters you set. And so it could be, new subscribers, they see this paragraph, whereas everyone who's been here more than a month doesn't see that paragraph. So that would be an option. I think if you can get a lot done in your one welcome email, that's a good strategy, especially if you're setting those strong expectations. Because as soon as you start jumping into welcome weeks and dynamic content, you're adding complexity that you might not need.
Agreed. All right. Any more questions from the crowd? I love that Seth is dropping in like, hey, here's how to do this in Curated. We currently don't have dynamic content at this point in time. The template for the product is set up in such a way that it does not get clipped in Gmail because it uses Markdown and kind of eliminates certain code from needing to be there that dynamic content requires. But a lot of people use it in conjunction with another sender if they are doing like separate marketing email campaigns in addition to their newsletter. So that just gives everyone a little highlight of that. We have sessions coming up at 2:00 and 3:00 and 5:00. No more questions for Liz? No more questions? Okay, it has been a copywriting odyssey. I really appreciate you joining us today. Everyone give her some thanks in the chat. Appreciate everyone being here. Newsletter Fest has been, it's kind of blown me away. A lot of great conversations and connections being made. So excited that we connected over this. If you don't mind, Seth, dropping the Slack link in one more time. I know we had like a crowd of people that seemed to get here about 10 minutes later than our start. The replay of this will be available on YouTube immediately if you missed the first part, because there was genius throughout the whole thing. So anything else to add?
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. All right, everyone, take a bathroom break. We'll see you back at 3 o'clock with Eric Barnes from the Daily Memphian. And scene.